Hey, this is Steve Orlando back again for another episode of the conversation series we're calling Who's Got the Juice? Who's we in that scenario? It's PM Spirits, my former employers from before I was a mid-card star in the world of comics, and current purveyors of strange, geeky booze all across the country. Who's Got the Juice today is talking to my friend Mike Kingston, who we're going to talk to in a little bit. But for people who are maybe watching this for the first time, we're just a cross-industry conversation series. We're talking about connections you might not see between the booze industry and either my industry, which is comics, Mike's industry, which is also comics from a different side, and of course wrestling, as you'll come to find out. And just this idea that when you have a passion for stuff, when you have a given passion, it doesn't have to be the same thing. You got to fight for it, and you got to struggle to make your name. I think that's what the folks at PM have done. It's what made me proud to work with them when I was selling spirits for 10 years before I made it in comics, if anyone really can make it. And so I'm excited to come back here and talk to folks who are in the hustle in the same way. And have you folks watch and see that there's really a lot more similarities between industries than you would expect. So the short version, as I alluded to, for me, if this is your first episode, I was a wine and spirit specialist for 10 years, all the time trying to break into comics, show people that I could maybe do this job to at least the satisfactory, some would even say good measure. And about 5 years ago, I did. And I moved out of spirits. And now I've worked on books like Justice League America, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and not to mention The Shadow, and some wild stuff coming out in the future. But this isn't really about me. This is about the people I met along the way. So today, as I had said, we're going to talk to a longtime friend of mine, Mike Kingston, who is coming at comics from an avenue completely unlike myself, an avenue much closer, I think, actually, to what my friends at PM do, because he is building his brand from the ground up, despite really almost everyone telling him no and telling him that it couldn't happen. So let's find out a little bit more about that. Mike, thanks for coming on, man.
How's it going?
You know, it's light out and I'm alive and we've got some spirits to drink, so I'm pretty good. Listen, tell everyone, I mean, I know the deal with Headlocked. Let's actually wind it back a little further than you normally do when we're just bitching to ourselves at a bar. You know, PM was started by my friend Nick, who was an engineer and decided, despite the lifestyle, it just wasn't for him. It wasn't something, even though he was good at it, presumably, if you're watching, Nick, but even though he was doing the job, it wasn't necessarily what was making him feel life. He needed to do something different. He needed to go out and pursue his passion, which in his case was craft spirits, having grown up amongst production, wine and spirits production in France. So you have a bio degree, and here we are talking about comic books. Let's go back further than usual. Talk to me about then, and then get us to now.
All right, just to be clear, I have a biochemistry degree.
You see that I just used a prefix because I can't remember. That's how long I've known.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, no, I when I was a kid, I always liked science. It was, this is why the grass is green. This is why your stomach works. That kind of stuff. And
Why does our stomach work?
I don't remember anymore. It's been like 20 years.
That's fair. That's tense. You liked knowing why your stomach works. Now it's.
But you get, as you get further up the ladder, it just becomes more. I guess it becomes more lab oriented and stuff. And I guess I don't really think that was something that was my forte. A little heavy handed, I guess, so it just wasn't doing it for me, I guess. And I always loved comics and I always loved wrestling. So, I guess in a similar vein, I decided to sort of strike out and pursue my own passion as well.
Yeah, so talk to me about the entry point into comics. You are a guy who normally would be folding me up into a briefcase and tossing me into a locker, because we are at the same age, clearly, as viewers can see. So when we went to high school together, you were throwing me like a paper airplane. If we'd actually talked, we would have known that we had the same interests. So sadly, we never bridged that divide. But that said, where did the comics come from? I mean, you played the football, you did sport. So how did we get here?
I mean, I guess I've always been I've always been kind of a nerd. So I mean, I was, into science and into stories, fantasy, superheroes, or whatever. But I mean, I've been reading comics my whole life. I read them as I was a kid, and I just never stopped. Kind of the same avenue with wrestling, but I just kind of there were things that I liked that continually brought me some sort of enjoyment. So I just kept doing them. I guess I've never really been bound by what people think. So in a lot of ways, just did the sort of things that I like. I also like football. I played football for a long time. I played football after I stopped playing in school. I played in like flag leagues and stuff. Like I enjoy the game. Like I don't like screaming and beating my head into lockers or anything like that. But I enjoyed playing the sport. So I guess if there's anything, I've always tried to do the things that I like, sort of irrespective of anybody's general thoughts or feelings about me. So, which has been a source of my strength, but probably also also a source of my weakness.
It's never easy doing what you want to do when people tell you you have to do what you need to do. So I understand. So that said, for folks who haven't been aware of Headlocked, my journey in comics has been somewhat traditional. I worked for DC Comics, Marvel Comics, Image Comics, a lot of things with comics in the name, because I do relatively normative stuff, books about people being angry, having sex, and hitting each other in the face. You haven't done that for many years in the car, driving to wrestling shows and listening to you kvetch. We've talked about how the book that you do and the story you want to tell, the audience is wide, but it's not one that in the mainstream folks have ever recognized the appeal of. It's not one that, in my opinion, folks have really wanted to let you tell, not that you've ever let that stop you. And I think that is germane to what goes on with a lot of the stuff that PM is putting out, as we'll taste later, because they're bringing products to market that are not the mainstream hits. They're bringing products to market that are types of spirits that have maybe almost become extinct in many cases. Things like Pinot de Charance, a lot of single plot eau de vies and rums, things that folks haven't tried before. And part of the need for that is that you have to educate at the same time that you're promoting yourself. You have to explain to folks why these things matter. So that's a lot of prompts, but I want to know, like, you've essentially built Headlock from the ground up. I want folks to know what it's about briefly, because I've only got so much broadband here. And I want to know how you got from word one to where we are now, because it is not the normative path like I've taken. And we're here talking today because you've really built something special in defiance, in many cases, of industry norms.
I mean, I think just comics as a medium, I think eventually just sort of pigeonholed itself into being superhero stuff with sort of a sprinkling of other genres. But I mean, I feel like there was a point where they were just doing superhero books, and not everybody, obviously, but that was what was considered the mainstream. When you ask somebody what a comic book movie is, nobody's going to say Road to Perdition, even though it is. I mean, or Ghost World or whatever. So I just, I had a story I wanted to tell that was, I guess, it's a straight drama. It's like a cable drama, like something you'd see on HBO or FX or whatever. There's no real genre elements to it. It's just it's a kid working his way through the wrestling business, sort of, behind the scenes kind of stuff, just navigating the seedy underbelly of the wrestling business, trying to find his art and whatnot. And I think that it was definitely met with a lot of resistance. But I think if anything, like, as media sort of splintered and there's been more channels and avenues for people to bring their stuff to the world, it's more a matter of, instead of letting somebody tell your story, than finding your audience. So I went out and I found my audience. I went to wrestling shows. I mean, I initially sold my book out of my backpack at wrestling shows and at Comic-Con tables and things, where places where I was welcomed and was allowed to sort of grow my audience from nothing, in a way that's non-traditional. I mean, Headlocked has never been, I mean, some stores have ordered it obviously, but it's never really been in comic book stores per se. It's, you know, at least not on a wide level. So, you know, we fund everything through Kickstarter. Everything's got like a real sort of grassroots, you know, grounding to it. And we, you know, we just go out, and I put myself in front of as many people that I think would like it. And I know where those people are, because I'm one of those people. I mean, it's the type of book that I myself wanted to read or would have wanted to read as a fan. So, you know, it's just about putting, you know, putting boots on the ground and just getting in front of people. And maybe that's non-traditional settings for comics, but it's worked for me. I mean, we funded 5 books now, and you know, I've got a sort of a side publishing deal with like a wrestling-based subscription service, and you know, we're working on a 6th volume now. So it's worked. It's a ton of work. I mean, I wish I could spend 100% of my time creating instead of 50% of my time creating and 50% of my time chasing everybody down. But I guess I tell the story I want to tell, and you know, to do that, this is the way, you know.
It's a nice Mandalorian quote there. Let me
No,
eternally date this interview for people watching it 100 years from now on the inside of their eyelids. So it's funny you should say that. The thing that we're going to eventually taste today is from a line called PM Spirits Projects. And when I interviewed the owner, Captain Cognac, we were talking about how everything in this line is stuff that he basically put in a cellar with no plan. And you know, wouldn't it be nice to release it? But you know, there's no, especially at the time when it went in years and years ago, there was no like 5-year plan. It was like, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, and we're going to keep doing the next thing for as long as we can. And now on the other side of it, here we are, you know, trapped in many cases apart from each other thanks to the ongoing global bastard. And now that sort of idea that had no endpoint, which was cellaring a lot of this stuff, has come around and proven fruitful and useful. And I think that's the way a lot of creative endeavors go. In the past discussions with other folks, we've talked about how really, like spirits production, when you deal with like single producers, small craft producers, it is a creative project. You know, we don't necessarily think of it that way on the outside, because we just, you know, we open the bottle, we drink it, and you know, maybe we think about it. Maybe we kick back out and don't want to think about it. But the point is, we don't necessarily, I think, in the mainstream, think of spirits production as a creative endeavor. But if you ask me, you know, putting years and years of your life into a limited bottle, where when it's gone, you know, nothing that tastes exactly the same way will ever return, that is a creative endeavor. That takes passion, it takes drive, and it takes patience, all things that, especially you, and to an extent me, even though I'm angrier, should have, the things that we've tried to hone. So I don't actually know the answer to this, but I assume when you started off in Headlocked, I wonder if the goalposts have changed now that you've seen the audience you have. You know, did you have an endpoint in mind? Are you still achieving that, or does it keep expanding and growing? And from sort of some of the side volumes you released, I do kind of know the answer. I lied. I'm just working you. But I feel like it's a similar thing. You know, even since I've known you, you've had a story you want to tell, and then it keeps changing and growing and getting bigger. So was that the case, or are you still executing the initial plan, like right down the middle, Pascaloni style, or like what? Where did it start? Where is it at now, years in? Because it's 10 years of Headlock this year. Is that correct?
Yeah. Actually, technically 12.
Well, 12 is not 10, so maybe you would like to elaborate on that.
No, I mean, I started in 2000. I mean, the first book came out in 2008. So that, you know, at least if we're doing the new math, I think that's 12. But it's changed a little bit. It's grown. It's definitely grown. I mean, when I started, I didn't know any wrestlers. I didn't, you know, I did a ton of research. I mean, one of the sort of holdovers from my biochemistry background is that I tend to be very research oriented. So I feel like I could write about anything. If you can give me a topic and give me, you know, a week, and I'll find an interesting way to, you know, get into it, partially too, because my brain doesn't work like a normal brain works, I think. So
That's true.
but it's definitely evolved. I mean, so in addition to now doing the main Headlock story, we do this sort of birth to sister series called Tales from the Road, which are stories where I work with a famous wrestler and we collaborate on a story together, and we bring wrestling into a bunch of different genres. We've done a story about a guy who trains Bigfoot to wrestle, and just as one example, I guess. But we've gone into all different genres. I mean, we've done horror stories and sci-fi and fantasy.
So nonfiction in the case of Bigfoot.
Yes, and we've done a like a riff on like El Santo, the old El Santo versus the monster movies. I mean, we've done all kinds of stuff, and it's been super fun. And it's just a different type of storytelling for me, but it gives me a chance to sort of, not just do straight drama. It allows me to sort of, and I think one of the side things is when I go off and tell these other stories, it sort of gets me, cleanses my palate a little bit and gets me excited to come back to Mike Hartman and the main Headlock story. So it's been fruitful. I mean, I never thought I would know wrestlers, you know what I mean? Like, I just thought I'd make a cool wrestling comic. And I guess over the years, I've had almost 40 different wrestlers contribute to the book. Jerry the King Lawler, WWE Hall of Famer, also known for slapping Andy Kaufman on David Letterman, is the cover artist to my books. He's a famous wrestler, but also a really talented artist. And we do Norman Rockwell homage covers, which I love because I'm also a big Norman Rockwell fan, as is Jerry. But, I've worked with Ric Flair, Mick Foley, AJ Styles, Samoa Joe. Some of the biggest names in the history of the business. And it's still, it never really gets old to me to be able to, sit down with somebody that I was a fan of growing up, or somebody who I admired or respected, and have them sort of treat you like a creative equal. I mean, I sat down at a bar with Ric Flair over drinks, and we sort of hashed out a comic book story together, which is the coolest thing I can think of. So
how many drinks?
What's that?
How many drinks in the case of Flair?
So the funny story is I tried to have a secret drinking contest with him, where I wasn't going to tell him I was going to try to outdrink him, but I was. I mean, just so I could be like, oh, I outdrank Ric Flair. But, I wasn't going to tell him because there was no way I could hang. And still he beat me, which is sort of upsetting.
I mean,
drank 11
you guys are also the same age, right?
What's that?
You guys are also the same age, all three of us, right? So you shouldn't feel bad.
Right. He drank 11 martinis in the time that I drank 7, and then he bought me a $200 shot of Louis the 14th. And
we don't talk about that royalty on this podcast. We kayfabe Louis the 13th on
13th.
Whatever, how many Louis there are.
It almost killed me. So
I'm kidding. Well, that's a good segue. So I do want to talk more about sort of the cognitive dissonance that I think happens with people when you try to sell your book. But you mentioned drinking. So let's actually taste the booze. If you could hold up for the folks, because I only have a tiny science bottle. This is not a work, folks. Stuff is rare. So you can see this is the PM Project 6-year-old single malt whiskey. If Kingston can read how many bottles it is there, it should be on the label. It should say like one of so many bottles. I have a science vial, as you can see, folks, but it's real, and I have it in a glass. I know it's taken Mike a long time to read, but still, he's only been up for a couple hours.
Yeah, I don't see where it says how many bottles there are.
It's okay. Reading is hard. However, they're all limited runs, and what we have today is a single malt. As I had said, these are all aged in Cognac, France, in the owner, Captain Cognac's private cellar. We're releasing them now. No additives, no filtration. Whether it's cognac, whatever kind of spirit is in the bottle, this is a single malt. We're not messing with it in any way. You're getting the real, true spirit unmeddled with in the bottle. So when we talk about these things being passion projects, if you view them that way and you view them as creative endeavors, how the hell could we ever get in the way with that and impose our will on it?
All right, so this is kind of cool. We totally didn't plan this, but it says the first fill ex-bourbon cask was on August 10th, 2012, which was actually the month and the year that I started Headlocked. So
there you go.
that was when our first book came out. So I think that's wild.
I would point out that I did not plan that, and you've also said that Headlocked both started in 2008 and 2012 in the course of this interview.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I guess that's wrong. I got 12 years in 2008 messed up. All right.
Yeah, well,
I haven't even started drinking yet.
And well, but that said, so you pour yourself some, but like you normally are a whiskey guy. I do want to talk a little bit about your relationship with whiskey. I mean, you know what you like after this time, but you pivot through a lot of industries. We talked about BarCon with some other folks on these interviews, but like from a business standpoint, from a social standpoint, have spirits, have booze, like have they been a connection maker for you? Actually, I would say I'm interested in your answer, especially because though folks might not admit it, there's a surprising amount of wrestlers who are teetotalers. So maybe it doesn't make the connections people expect, but in other cases, maybe it has. Like, so how did you get to being a whiskey guy, barring that we also both went to the same college and probably had some of the same experiences with other types of spirits? Like, you know what you like today. What do you like about it? And then we can taste this.
You know, just quite simply, I guess I've always just enjoyed the way it tastes, more than other types of spirits, I guess. And it mellows me out, like mentally, like different things have different effects on you. And I really enjoy the way it makes me feel. Like it just, you know, I don't sort of project a lot of energy, but sort of mentally, my brain is always going like 100 miles an hour. So sometimes you just want to slow it down a little bit, and a good glass of whiskey always does that for me.
I frequently call you the sloth valedictorian when you're not around.
But yeah, no, I've always enjoyed whiskey, and it just mellows me out, man. I like the way it makes me feel more than anything else. That's like the most important thing that I enjoy. I mean, I think, you know, comics and wrestling are both very social businesses. So yeah, I mean, having drinks with people is definitely a way to sort of build connections. I mean, I think a lot of there are some wrestlers today who are definitely not drinkers, but the old school guys are most definitely drinkers. I mean, I think there was a period of time, obviously in the 80s and into the 90s, where those guys were, I mean, hard drinkers. I mean, I think that that tradition is kept on by Chris Jericho, who by all accounts is the hardest drinking wrestler today. So
frequent watcher of this interview series, I'm sure. So the headline, we'll be on What Culture, like local comics creator shoots on Jericho. But let's try it. So what we have here is a single malt. You know, and I think again, for everything we're talking about for creative moments, like you got barley, you got water, you got air and time. You know, there's not many ingredients, and the wood that it's aged in. And so I think that it can always be really cool to see how when you taste single malts from all over the world, like there's some, you know, the flavor profiles do have sort of rhyme, but you are tasting, you know, you're tasting the soil, you're tasting that place. And so it's exciting for me to share it with you. We can taste it. You can tell me what you think about it, and then we can continue to taste it. And I'll grill you after that.
All right. I mean, it's remarkably smooth. Wow. I mean, for the most part, I generally drink, you know, my stuff with some sort of a chaser of some sort, but that's really that's really smooth. I like that a lot. That's excellent.
No, I'm glad to hear it. I think, you know, one of the reasons you put a little ice in it, I think that's great. You know, people sometimes, we used to have clients, you know, usually very masculine men who would like buy whatever single malt or bourbon they had. We had the highest proof. And when you have something overproof, you want to put it on at least a couple, either a large rock or some smaller rocks, because interacting with that water will open up a lot of the flavors locked in by the alcohol. It's not the case if something is proofed down artificially to 80% excuse me, 80 proof or 40%. But when it's not, you're actually hiding flavor from yourself if you don't do that. So of course they would come in, oh, it's like, it's 60% alcohol. I'm just gonna, and then they burn their face off and they look like jackasses. So, but what you're seeing there is that when it's unmetalled with, it can be smooth even if it's higher proof, because a lot of the oils, a lot of the stuff that would be in a whiskey that could leave or be weakened by heavy filtration or processing isn't there. And so you get a lot more character, as you said, smoothness out of it. I was excited to drink this with you. We can keep drinking it, and we will. But I want to hit on something. You're the second person related to wrestling on this conversation series. And it's funny, I was saying spirits, until I got on the phone with Captain Cognac, who owns the company. He always says booze. And so I'm trying to retrain myself, because I imprinted like a baby elephant saying spirits, but he always says booze. And I think that is actually really interesting to me. And I asked him about it, because part and parcel to that is we don't want to feel pretentious. We have good stuff, maybe stuff you have to learn about, but this is something that is for everyone. It's not just for the learned, it's not just for a certain type of folk. And it's really for that workman-like. It's produced by folks largely who are sort of salt of the earth, farmers, distillers doing their own thing. And we want to present it that way as honest but unpretentious. Now, what the fuck am I talking about? I think there's a lot of perceptions about the wrestling and to an extent the comics industry. But what I like about it, especially in the types of shows that you and I met on, is that I do think it's truly a sort of the people form of entertainment. When you are going to shows in these like VFWs or like Polish cultural homes like you and I have been to, almost by nature, because of the perception of it being scripted, there's no pretension. But I do think the folks that get it understand that it is a very blue collar sort of primalistic form of entertainment and show business and performance that I've always really gravitated towards. What do you think about that? I mean, I'm sort of teeing you up an open-ended question, but I think there is a very welcoming nature to at least indie wrestling. We're not going to talk about what's on TV. And I think that the feel there is very, it almost feels like a throwback to me of people, because you travel around and you're putting on a show for the 500 people that are there, not for a focus group, 7,000, 70,000 person audience.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely got for lack of a better term, the sort of carnival feel to it, where, you're going from town to town and you sort of set up and you entertain the folks and then you move on to the next town. And I think that there's definitely something about that doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, there's not a lot of things that tour. I mean, barely. I mean, a lot of high level musicians barely tour anymore. I mean, I think just going to the people and having that sort of experience. And the one thing I think about wrestling is there's so many universal themes to it that people can relate to, that anybody can relate to. And then when you're there, when you're in the experiencing it, when you're in the venue and you're watching it and you hear the smack of the flesh and you see the ring move and you hear the guys fall. I mean, there's always that sort of, oh, it's not real sort of thing. And, but then when you're experiencing it, it's sort of more immersive, and you lose that if the people are really good at their craft, you sort of forget about it. You know what I mean? You just allow yourself to be sort of sucked in by the physicality, by the storytelling, by the, whatever story that they're telling, by the emotions that the wrestlers are giving off, assuming they are, again, skilled practitioners. But I think that's, I don't know. I think in some ways, like, wrestling is probably the last like form of vaudeville, I guess, that exists.
Well, yeah, I think I agree completely. And I think that it's basically, it's the victim in many cases of bad marketing. People, oh, how could I ever think this was real? I've never cared, and you see like the Bella saying, oh, it's ballet with body slams. Well, I think it's a stupid buzz phrase. But I do think when you go, you see that it is, as you said, like it is a performance for the people, you know, for the people that are around in small towns to entertain them. And it's obviously a performance, but I think there is still something raw and very unique about that. That said, the last thing I want to talk about, you know, a lot of things in the PM portfolio, there's perceptions about it in every way that you've just said. There's perceptions about cognac. There's you know, if there's awareness at all, there's perceptions about Armagnac being, I would say, obviously somewhat more egalitarian. It's a lot of the stuff in the portfolio that I used to work. It has a fancy French name, and then people wonder, how does this relate to me? So, you know, you can talk about your book, you can talk about the industry as a whole, but when you're in there, either meeting people at cons or you're just talking to new people about what you do, what do people think it is? And then, you know, what is it in reality? What do people think your story is about? What do people think wrestling is? You can answer both. And then, you know, I want to know what you really think it is, because we do that all the time. Like, you don't have to be uptight about drinking cognac. We want to make these things, we want to bring these things to a relatable level and contradict what people think about booze and show them that it can be for them. And I'm sure you've dealt with something similar.
I deal with it all the time. I deal with it with wrestling and with comics, actually. I mean, honestly, I'd say more so with comics, just because wrestling still has a somewhat very narrow presentation. I mean, it's expanded over the years, but I mean, I think generally people's perception of wrestling is the WWE television, WCW television style portrayal of wrestling, more than the house shows and the individual, like, local performances. But you know, I have to deal with that, and I have to, you know, fight with sort of comics as superheroes and people sort of not understanding that I'm basically writing a cable drama in a comic book form instead of, you know, superhero wrestlers or sci-fi wrestlers or whatever. I mean, I think that's the hard part, where people get pigeonholed, you know, or a medium gets pigeonholed as anything. And anything, I mean, any medium can be used to tell any kind of story or make any kind of presentation you want. And it's part of what I love about Headlocked, is sort of pushing the envelope in both wrestling and comics, telling a drama story in a medium that's traditionally used to tell genre stories, and telling a story about wrestling, about the craft of wrestling, in a way that, you know, sort of, I guess, an elevated discussion about the art of wrestling in a way that, you know, people don't generally have, where they're generally like, hey, it's a guy dressed like a clown fighting a guy, you know, dressed like an undead biker wizard. And
That's just you and me, like,
right.
at our last con. But when are you going to tell us about wrestling?
So, I mean, I guess that I mean, that's the sort of things that appeal to me, you know, as a creator, I guess, is just pushing the boundaries and doing, you know, just like I said, telling the story that I want to tell. So, I think, you know, I guess it's good to get in the mindset of not, you know, of I guess just trying to think about what the creator intends. And I guess that sort of informs my perspective when I try things, when I try to experience things. Like, I try to think about, you know, why was this made? What did the creator, you know, intend when he made it? What's my experience? And I mean, I guess that's probably a little pretentious too, saying that, but also, I mean, I have to like it at the end of the day. Like, I don't like anything because of what it is. Like, I still have to enjoy the consumption part of it. You know what I mean? I think for a long time in wrestling, people had this love affair with Japanese wrestling because it was exotic and supposedly, you know, different or better or whatever. And I think there were people who liked Japanese wrestling who probably didn't watch it that much, but just, you know, there's that sort of pretension of being like, I'm a Japanese wrestling fan, and I have this thing that you don't know about. So
Japanese wrestling is the Pappy Van Winkle of wrestling. You know, I only drink Pappy. Well, then you drink 4 times a year. But I think what you're really saying, though, I shouldn't say that. I'm not going to put words in your mouth. But what I get from what you're saying is that a lot, you know, I know from reading your book and what you're talking about is when people get in the door on something they think is not for them, it's the humanity and the human story that sells them. I know from reading your book, I mean, that's the medium you use to get people to care about wrestling. Mike Hartman, it's that human story. It's about his desires and his drive. And honestly, I think the human story you get to make wrestling fans care about comics is your story. When they know that you're at 40 shows in a year, that there's only 52 weekends, when they know that you're doing 50 or 60 hours a week and still doing all those shows, that you can get that story to them. I think your story is what sells that.
It's one of the things, honestly, that I'm most proud of is I think like a lot of times your first comic is based off of a character or whatever. My first comic was because I saw Spider-Man and Captain America on the cover fighting, and I knew that they were both good guys. And at 8 years old, I was like, whoa, I wonder what would cause this or whatever. And I've been a ton of people's first comic. There's a ton of people who've never read comics before that discovered comics through Headlocked. And to a lesser extent, there have been people who've never watched wrestling before who've come to wrestling through Headlocked. But
I'm one of them. Through knowing you, I went from essentially busting your chops about wrestling and is fill in the blank person still alive when we would go out to lunch to appreciating especially the workers themselves and how much they have put into what they do. So it's what sold me. And that I think is, I always try to find, after we talk for X amount of time on these things, I try to find sort of a key theme. And it seems like that the work and the human element is the theme here. I think it's easy to think of something as not for you. It's easy to think of something as pretentious or outside your range. But when you realize how much people care, and for me, that's what it was. It was the first time you and I went to a show in Troy, and guys were throwing themselves through tables, gimmicked or not, for $20. I was like, how much do these guys get paid? And they were making $20 for the whole night. When we drink what we're drinking now, and you see, someone took, in this case, 6 years of their life monitoring this, overseeing it, and making sure it was the expression they wanted it to be. There's real people behind this. There's a real human story behind this. And maybe you do think that single malt, maybe you think I'm a jackass for saying single malt instead of scotch, but when you taste it, it's still worth a try. And it can be for you, because at the end of the day, everybody has a passion for the most part. And we can identify with the fact that how much someone cared about this, and it is at least worth a try, even if we don't think it's for us. And maybe it doesn't connect, but getting people in the door, I think it is the human story, whether it's what we're drinking, whether it's what we're selling, whether it's what we're watching, it really gets people in the door.
I think passion too, like you said before, I think that's we live in a world now where so many things are focus group to death and, made with the express, I'll make this because I can make money. Like when I got into wrestling, or when I decided I wanted to write Headlocked, after years of reading wrestling comics that were just licensed comics that people would try to sort of hack out when wrestling was hot or whatever, you never felt anything about them, and you can kind of tell. And I feel like that's what I bring to Headlocked, is my passion for wrestling, my passion for comics, my passion for storytelling. And I think anybody that does anything with passion, whether it's for you or not for you, I did a half air quote there. I don't know if that, but I think that's definitely worth a try. I'll try anything that, somebody took the time to pour their heart into. And I think that when you experience that, I think that always comes through, versus, when you see some sort of polished or whatever packaged, processed thing versus something that somebody made out of love. I think that's undeniable. And I think that always comes through in the consumption of it.
I couldn't have actually wrapped this up in a nicer bow. You got all your shit in, which I appreciate, but I think that is kind of the last word, because that's what we've been talking about for the past, 45 minutes. And it's true. So I hope folks, you have an eye on what's going on, obviously, with my friends at PM. You have an eye on what's going on with Headlocked. Kingston, is there anything else you want to get over before we put a bow on this thing?
Just if anybody wants to find me, I'm on all the social media at Headlocked Comic. It's all run by me. So, come say hey. See what you got cooking.
Listen, folks, we have more Who's Got the Juice that'll be coming out. But for now, thank you. We're excited for you to see this. We're excited for it to be out in the world, and we will Talk to you soon. I'm Steve Orlando. We're out of here.